Hello. Thank you for your interest in the IACP's Alzheimer's Initiative Program. This program is supported by a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice. Today's webinar is a summary of situations in which law enforcement and/or first responders might encounter people with Alzheimer's disease, presented by Tim Sutton. I will now turn it over to Tim.
What we want to do now is discuss some situations where law enforcement or first responders may end up encountering somebody with Alzheimer's disease, uh, be it a call for service or consensual encounter or some other type of emergency. We need to understand the behaviors and issues related to Alzheimer's disease. My name is Tim Sutton. I'm a sergeant with the Hanover County Sheriff's Office just north of Richmond, Virginia. And I've been in law enforcement for about 28 years, from patrol to investigations. In 2003, I started working with families who were dealing with the issue of wandering, where their loved one would wander off due to a cognitive disorder. And I started meeting a lot of family that were dealing with Alzheimer's as well as autism, special needs. Started my own company called A Better Understanding, mainly to get out there and educate people on the behaviors related to both the disease and the disorders. But today we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, and we're going to give you some insight through my experience over the years dealing with the caregivers as well as those suffering from Alzheimer's. Like I said, I've been law enforcement for about 28 years, done various jobs with the sheriff's office, and have had the opportunity to travel the country and teach. And we find that people are really impressed once they hear the information, because whether or not you know that you've dealt with this while you're working or in your personal life, once you start to get the information, many people begin to realize that they have encountered it, and had they known what they know now, they could have handled the situation differently. We can respond over and over again to calls for service night after night to the same house to deal with the break-ins where somebody broke in and they're living in the attic now, where we think it's a mental situation, only because we haven't been educated on Alzheimer's. Many times those are related to Alzheimer's. And what we want to try to do is give you the tools to get out there and do your job effectively, so that you're not utilizing so many manpower hours and trying to solve the situation day after day after day. Hopefully we can change it from going out there every night to every week or every month, but we need to know some of this information to help us, and just add it to your tool belt. The number one reason I think many people figure we need this training is because of the wandering issue, where all of a sudden we get the call that Grandpa's gone. Grandpa went out for a walk and never came back. The caregivers many times are hesitant to call 911 and ask for help, because a lot of them feel like we're going to be accusatory, come in and want to know why they weren't watching their loved one, how they got allowed them to get out. They're also concerned if we get involved, then social services, adult protective services may get out. The caregivers may let Grandpa go for a walk every day at 5 o'clock. That's a routine for them. He just walks around the block, comes back home. But there may come a time when Grandpa, instead of making that right turn to go around the block, just continues walking straight. Also, many times with Alzheimer's, they've lost so much of their memory, they're looking for something familiar. They may be 30, 40 years in the past in their mind, and they want to go home. They want to go to wherever they lived 30, 40 years ago. They think that's still their home. So they develop a mission, and they will do everything in their power to accomplish that mission. And the caregivers, they've got to live their life. They still need to take showers, go to the bathroom, take care of little odds and ends. And it only takes a split second for that person with Alzheimer's to just disappear. So I think we need to be somewhat empathetic when we go out and we deal with these cases, because again, the caregivers, they don't want to bother us for the most part, and many of them will go out there and search 2 or 3 hours before they even call us to respond. So we need to do our best to break that wall down so that they can know that we are there to help. We get a lot of calls about thefts and intruders. I mean, imagine you're sitting in your house and all of a sudden somebody opens the door and walks in and starts telling you, you need to go take a shower, you need to get up, you need to do this, you need to do that, and you don't recognize that person. You know, you're scared, you're frightened. Well, the person with Alzheimer's disease, again, if they've lost the past 30, 40 years of their life, those family members many times are strangers to them. They don't recognize them. So they think somebody's breaking into the house, telling them what to do, and they're scared, and they will call 911. Also, on the opposite end of that, imagine that person with Alzheimer's who has, again, lost that 30, 40 years of memories, short-term memories. They're on their mission trying to go home. They find the house where they grew up. In their mind, they still live there. They walk up, turn the knob, walk into a house, and they're in a, these strangers have no idea who this person is that breaking into their house. And across the country, I know there have been issues with the stand your ground law, where somebody comes across that threshold and they do end up getting shot. So it works both ways. Also, the complaints about thefts and people stealing things. Somebody with Alzheimer's disease may have jewelry, may have money where they sit it down. A few minutes later, they pick it up and they'll go hide it. They'll put it in a shoe. They'll put it in one of the most discreet places you can imagine. Turn around and forget that they've hidden it. And they come back looking for their money or jewelry that was supposed to be sitting on the counter, and it's not there. So their general assumption is somebody stole my belongings. They call 911. We end up responding, and I think it's important when we do respond, if we can pick up on the Alzheimer's, or if the family says it's Alzheimer's, don't put it off to the Alzheimer's. We still need to do our job and investigate. It could be the issue of Alzheimer's where they hit it, but also keep in mind that that family could be stealing that person blind. Because what better victim than somebody that can't remember? I just know that many times when people with Alzheimer's do pass away, when the family goes through the house, they find things hidden all throughout the house, and they realize they were accused of taking this. I remember when Mom accused me of taking that, and they find it all hidden. So these are some calls that we will go on. I'm not saying don't let your guard down for the break-ins when you're responding to these calls. Keep your officer safety intact, but also consider the fact when you get there that this may be a situation that's basically due to the Alzheimer's. Also, think about that person living in a neighborhood with Alzheimer's, and maybe all the neighbors know. Well, the way kids are these days, they may be terrorizing this person. So she may be calling saying somebody's trying to break into the house, and we keep going over and over. Do a thorough investigation. You may have kids out there trying to terrorize this person. You may find a screen that's been damaged where somebody's in there just trying to terrorize that individual. So, but I know my agency, we deal with a lot of these type of calls, and luckily we've been able to educate our whole department on it. Complaints from store owners, and we have a lot of people who are caregivers who are still trying to hold down jobs and live their life, and obviously they can't be at home with their mom or dad. So what do? Many times they will end up taking them to a mall, drop them off at the mall, let the mall be the babysitter. So you end up with that individual drops them off at the mall, goes to work, they just wander the mall. You may get the loitering calls where they're out there loitering. Shop owners don't know why this person keeps hanging around. But in looking at the picture of this mall, you've got the trees growing up, and I think this is typical for a lot of malls you see. You've got the trees, the bushes, bright atmosphere. Well, you take a 80-year-old gentleman dropped off at the mall. Let's say when he was younger, he worked on a farm, he drove a tractor. Well, if he's out on the tractor and has to go to the bathroom, what does he do? He chops off the tractor, goes just inside the woods, and he may pee right there. Well, you don't know where he is in his mind, and all of a sudden, he's standing up there against one of the trees or in that foliage, and he's urinating. Well, you have mom coming through the mall with her 5-year-old daughter sees this, it could very well end up being a 911 call where you're the officer responding and you've got an irate parent because her daughter's had to see this and is going to be scarred for life, going to need counseling, and they're looking at this old man as being a predator or a pervert. Well, you find out what the situation is. You know, you need to get that caregiver there once you determine what's going on. But the question is whether or not you're going to prosecute. You know, you've got indecent exposure. However, you need to look at the totality of the circumstances and decide, was there intent? Was there intent? If it's not, there is no intent, and it was due to the Alzheimer's, then you're going to need to explain to that mom who wants to press charges what the situation is. And it may not go over very well, but it may be a situation where you need to educate that mom and tell her, you know, I hope you never have to deal with a situation like Alzheimer's. You know, this gentleman is dealing with it, the caregiver's dealing with, and it's such a terrible disease, and this is kind of why he was doing what he was doing. He wasn't trying to be offensive, but, you know, I hope one of your family members never has to deal with this because it is a terrible thing. It's an opportunity for you to educate. Hopefully, the mom will be receptive to it, but then you've also got store owners who are wondering why the trees keep dying. You know, somebody's damaging our trees and bushes. They may want the gentleman charged with vandalism for what he's doing. So it could very easily be a call for service that you have to deal with. It's a big fire to put out, but it may offer the opportunity for you to educate some people on Alzheimer's and what's going on. The reports of abuse and neglect. One thing as you get older, and typically with Alzheimer's disease, the immune system's jeopardized, but you will find that individuals with Alzheimer's, they may bruise easily. You know, it doesn't take much just to grab them and end up with a bruise. And you may have people calling in the alleged abuse or neglect. They're not caring for this person, or they see them go to the mailbox and they just notice that something's not right with them. Well, when you get there, you've got to investigate. And what you need to realize is these caregivers, it is stressful what they're dealing with. That person's memory is just going, and your caregiver is being robbed of their loved one, and their demeanor changes, and the caregiver is sick and tired of answering the same question every 2 minutes. Then they're feeding them in the morning, give them breakfast. An hour later, that person with Alzheimer's is yelling at them because they didn't feed them. Well, they don't remember being fed, and they're trying to explain to them, I fed you. Remember, you had eggs, you had bacon, but you're not going to convince them that they had breakfast. So for a caregiver, it's often been said that the caregivers suffer more than the person with Alzheimer's. So there is a point in time when many of your caregivers may just lose it and abuse the person or just get tired of dealing with it. We need to get in there and look at that. But also, with the Alzheimer's, for many of them in the evenings, they will start to get very irritated and agitated. It's called sundowning. If it's overcast or it's evening time, they'll get very feisty and argumentative, and they may be lashing out at the caregiver. They may be abusing the caregiver. But like I said earlier, their caregiver many times will let it go and doesn't report it because they don't want law enforcement coming in. They don't want social services, adult protection services coming in, telling them they're a terrible caregiver. And in their mind, they are the best caregiver for that person, and nobody can do it like them. So they're willing to put up with these things just to keep us from getting involved. So we need to understand that when and if we get those calls and have to investigate it. The other emergencies we deal with, there are many medications used in the first part of Alzheimer's, the Namenda, Aricept, Razodone. You know, a situation such as this, you know, with fire, you know, when we get into the house, we need to be receptive of our surroundings. Let's say the individual called in, somebody's gone unconscious, rescue responds, they're in there working on the person, and we see a bottle sitting there with Namenda, Aricept, and we discover that the person they're working on, that's not their medication. Hopefully that will alert us to the fact, okay, there's somebody else in this house that we need to find to make sure they're cared for because they're dealing with a form of dementia. You know, the fire issue here, one of the first senses that ends up going with Alzheimer's disease tends to be a sense of smell. So the person with Alzheimer's may not recognize the fact that the house is even on fire, and they don't see it as a threat. This right here is a good reason, if you have people in your community that are dealing with this, to convince them to disclose this information where you can put it in the CAD system so that when law enforcement, fire, EMS is responding to that residence, they can be alerted to the fact there is an individual in this house with Alzheimer's disease. Their bedroom is this particular bedroom, so that when you're responding, you're already designing a way to get at, pre-planning a way to get in there and save that person if they're stuck in there. So the person with Alzheimer's may not see that fire as danger and may just stay right where they are. So there are a lot of different medical emergencies when we respond. We just need to be receptive, and we don't want to transport a caregiver who's unconscious and end up leaving that person with Alzheimer's in the house with nobody to care for them. Suicides and homicides, we'll touch on that. These pills right here, something to consider is the accidental overdoses, where the person with Alzheimer's takes their medication, an hour later doesn't remember taking the medication, so they take it again, and then they don't remember it and take it again. Or you have a caregiver who gives them their medication, leaves for a couple hours, where another caregiver comes in. Well, if the new caregiver asks, did your daughter give you your medication? They're going to say no because they don't remember taking it. So you end up with that accidental overdose. The suicide and homicide, unfortunately, I think we're going to see a rise in this. We want to get the information out all over about Alzheimer's and what it does. But I think as people figure out how terrible this disease is, you're going to have, say, a husband take his wife to the doctor where she gets diagnosed with the probable early onset of Alzheimer's. And knowing what they know about Alzheimer's, the husband says, I don't think I can live through this. And the wife doesn't think she could deal with losing her memories. So the husband ends up taking her life, and he can't live with the fact that he took her life. So he turns a gun on himself, but he can't pull the trigger. But he knows all he has to do is call 911. Law enforcement's going to respond. If he answers the door with a gun in his hands and raises the gun up, then we'll take care of the problem. So I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more of this. Again, we want people to understand what Alzheimer's does and how it affects you and your family. But I think as we get that information out and more people are diagnosed with this, I think some of them are going to look at terminating their loved one's life as well as their own. And it's something we need to wake up to and be ready for. The assaults and domestic violence, we're going on a lot more of these domestics, and what most states have statutes in there in reference to domestic assaults, where if you have a predominant aggressor, a primary aggressor, and there's signs of assault, you shall make an arrest. I will throw an example at you that we've had to deal with. I went on a call. A gentleman called 911, said his house was on fire. The fire department, of course, responded, but then as soon as he hung up, we got a call from the wife, who said her husband had thrown her down and she hit her head on the coffee table and she was bleeding. So we get there, and the husband's sitting in the kitchen eating dinner, just like nothing ever happened. So talking to the wife, she said that her husband's got Alzheimer's. She had just brought him home from the hospital, and apparently he had lived through a fire at some point in his life, so he was reliving that event. She was worried he was going to get out of the house and take off and run into the woods, and we would not ever see him again. She stood in the doorway, tried to keep him from leaving. Well, he grabbed her, threw her on the ground. She hit her head on that coffee table and had been assaulted. But then she said one thing to me. She said, I got him home from the hospital, He has the Alzheimer's, but he doesn't even know I'm his wife. He knows I take care of him, but he really has no idea who I am. Now, the question is, was his intent to assault his spouse? I would say in this instance, it was not. Luckily, in Virginia, we have a additional code section that refers to the domestic assault code, and it says, yes, you shall make an arrest unless there are extenuating circumstances that would call for another course of action. In this case, we ended up getting him to the hospital, getting mental health involved. Hopefully, your mental health workers have had some Alzheimer's training. While Alzheimer's is not a mental health disorder, many times the way you have to deal with it is kind of the same path as mental health. We are officers. Obviously, we have to do an IBR or incident report to document it, but we also have to document in there why an arrest was not made, as well as that alternative action we took. We need to document all of those things. So I would just suggest you be understanding of this code section in your particular state. Now, had we gone to a domestic where the wife had been hit, had a black eye, and the husband says, oh, I've got Alzheimer's, but yeah, my wife wouldn't stop talking, or she did this, so I hit her. Well, we've got to do our job. Alzheimer's is not a way out. But in the first instance, with the gentleman that didn't even remember anything, was sitting there eating dinner, to take him and handcuff him and arrest him for something he has no idea what he's done, and put him in a jail, in a lockdown facility, general population, where the jailers come in the next morning and he's laying there in a pool of blood, and they come up and ask him what happened. He's obviously going to tell them he doesn't know. So you're placing him somewhere where he could easily become a victim. Our job is to get in there and take care of the situation. Sometimes that involves an arrest. Sometimes it may involve that other course of action. The key to all this, number one is officer safety. Nothing we're telling you should ever jeopardize your officer safety. I'm going home at the end of the night. That is my goal when I go to work every day. Luckily, hopefully everybody's going home fine, but I know I am going home alive. So maintain your officer safety. Be prepared. Many times there's a lot of confusion going on in that individual's mind. So try not to startle them. It's kind of like if any of us were to go to work one day and leave the house, get halfway to work, and realize that we'd used the stove, but we can't remember to turn it off. So we're riding down the road thinking to ourselves, okay, did I turn it off? Did I not turn it off? If we decide to go to work, we may be a little bit on edge all day long, a little irritated, agitated, and that's going to eat at you. The person with Alzheimer's has that nagging feeling that something's not right. They know they're forgetting something, but they'll never figure out what it is they're forgetting. So it gnaws at them. The difference is we can turn around and go check the stove. There's nothing they can do to get that nagging feeling out of their mind, and you see a lot of them being on edge, being aggressive, irritated. So when you go up to them, try not to touch them unless you actually have to, absolutely have to. Don't go up to this from the side or from the back and put your hand on them. Look them eye to eye, ask them, hey, can I help you? Can I help you sit down? Can I help you get up? Can I touch you? Is it okay? Before you do any of that, you don't want to startle them to make the situation worse. Now, these are just a few of the situations I've shared with you in responding to deal with Alzheimer's. I think the number of instances are unlimited. It's amazing what you can come across out there. But hopefully this gives you some insight on the situations and kind of how to deal with them. And effectively, like I said, effectively do your job the best you can for those citizens.
Thank you for viewing our webinar. If you have questions or you need to order materials, please email the Alzheimer's team at alzheimers@theiacp.org. Thank you.